Hello, my name is Amarika, and right now we're going to look at the intricacies of Buddhism through a non-Buddhist perspective. So this religion is more complicated and more intricate than it seems like, and hopefully through this essay we can explore what Buddhism really is. So to understand Buddhism, first we need to understand the origins of Buddhism. Let's start with the life of Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha. He was born as a Hindu, and a wealthy one at that. So at the day of his birth, a great religious person told his father, the king of that region, that he would become a great ruler if he was sheltered, or a great religious leader if he saw the four sights. Thus the king kept him surrounded by beauty and youth until he saw the four sights, which are as follows: an aging person, a diseased person, a rotting corpse, and an ascetic. When he saw this, he left his wife and child, and he went on a journey to become enlightened. He lived for the longest time as an ascetic, but he realized that this was a harsh way to live. He finally sat down to meditate under a bo tree, and he finally achieved enlightenment. He decided to go ahead and tell other people about his enlightenment, and so therefore he taught other people about his several teachings in the Deer Park sermon. After many years of happiness and teaching other people, he passed away and he attained nirvana. So back to the teachings that he taught other people, the most important things that he said were the Four Noble Truths, which are as follows. Number 1, life is suffering. Number 2, desire, or tanha, is the cause for suffering. Number 3, the only way to rid oneself of suffering, or tanha, is enlightenment. And number 4, the way to achieve enlightenment is through the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is also known as the middle path, and there are 8 steps that a person must take in order to achieve enlightenment or to be on the right path to enlightenment. And the 8 steps are to have the right belief, the right resolve, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and finally right concentration. The middle path is a troublesome way to live, especially in a capitalist society, because of how materialistic our Western society is. Thus, for Buddhists living in this Western world, it's very difficult for them to follow this middle path, because they can't have too many material things, or else they'll be living in a life of wealth, and they can't have too little things, because obviously they can't live as an ascetic, so they have to find that middle ground, and that's a very problematic thing to look for. So now that we have a good grasp on the origins of Buddhism, we can begin looking at some of the rituals that Buddhists practice. I'm focusing on rites of passages and milestones, particularly head shaving, becoming a monk, and marriage. The first rite of passage that only boys go through, not girls, primarily boys, is head shaving, which occurs usually a month after a baby is born. They go to the monastery and conduct the ceremony, where monks shave his head. In the case of a young boy, the parents will let him stay with the monks for an extended period of time. So when he's brought into the temple or into the stupa or wherever the monks live at, he comes in as a novice or a monk in training. If parents want, they can continue with the steps of becoming a monk. There are 2 steps that occur in a young man's life, the first being when a boy is 7 to 8 years old. Like the picture before, he shaves his head and he enters the monastery as a novice, and he undertakes the 10 precepts, which is an extension of the 5 precepts, and those 10 precepts are specific to novice monks. He would act as an attendant to a senior monk, and the senior monk would teach the novice monk Buddhist rituals, scripture, philosophy, and many other things related to becoming a monk. The second stage, which is also known as the ordination stage, occurs when a young man reaches about 20 years old and he can read, write, and chant simple Buddhist texts. Once he's ordained, a monk has to do the following. He has to shave his head as a sign of rejecting vanity. He has to take a religious name, wear the appropriate orange robe, renounce their many possessions, and keep things that are absolutely necessary. A robe, an alms bowl for begging or for getting money from other people, a belt, a razor, a filter for water, and a toothpick. Finally, the last ritual I'm focusing on is marriage. So marriage is considered very secular. Buddhists don't have any particular a way for people to get married. There are many different ways that the couple can go about becoming married. But usually what happens is that the bride and groom will go to a monastery and they will feed monks in order to receive a blessing. The monks will never attend the weddings themselves because monks aren't really involved or allowed to be involved in any kind of other ceremony. So specifically, they just, after the wedding, they will receive food from the bride and groom and they will give a blessing. So moving on from rituals, there are several sacred texts that Buddhists follow and base their lives off of. The different schools of Buddhism follow different texts. The Theravada Buddhists use the Pali Canon specifically. So the Pali Canon was written by Siddhartha Gautama, or Buddha in his own words, and this text was a way of spreading Buddhism and for Buddha's words to be spread throughout the world. So it's written for Buddhists and anyone interested in becoming a Buddhist because the text educates the readers about the principles of Buddhism and it lets people know what the Buddha believed in. Like I said before, the set of sutras spoken by the Buddha outlines the main ideas behind Buddhism, and it also highlights what the Buddha believed in and valued. This book holds a large significance of Theravada Buddhism because it told the Buddhists how to live their lives, and it's the book on which much of Theravada Buddhism is based off of. Conversely, in the Mahayana school of Buddhism, the Lotus Sutra is the primary sacred text. This collection of sutras was said to have been spoken by Buddha in his later life. Someone recorded what he said and kept it away for several hundred years before it came back and re-entered the Mahayana school. He didn't want the information or the words that the Buddha had written to be found so quickly, so he made sure to wait until the time was right before releasing that text. So this text emphasizes the various ways to achieve enlightenment, which could be through the bodhisattvahood, through meditation, or through the Eightfold Path. So the sacred text is what most Mahayana Buddhists use to find out ways to achieve enlightenment, and it's very appealing to others because of the promise of easy enlightenment. In Theravada Buddhism, enlightenment is pretty hard to find, but in Mahayana Buddhism, the way to achieve enlightenment is more universal and it's much more easier. So, looking at doctrines and beliefs of Buddhism, there are two major schools of Buddhism that interpret Buddhism differently. The two major schools are Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism. But a primary doctrine and belief that a lot of people look for in Buddhism is the concept of Dharma. So, this article in the News and Observer talks about a woman in Florida who posted a picture of her dog on Facebook with his mouth taped together. This received a lot of controversy, and several people were very angry about the fact that she did such a thing to an animal who obviously hadn't done no harm. The woman said that her dog was barking a lot, so because of that, she just decided to tape the dog's mouth shut, which is very unethical. So this directly contradicts the first precept of the 8 precepts. And so, by the way, the 8 precepts are an extension of the 5 precepts, and they're directed towards people who want to follow a stricter way of Buddhism. The first precept states, "I undertake to abstain from causing harm and taking life, both human and non-human." Clearly, this woman caused harm to an animal, which definitely has a soul according to the doctrines and beliefs of Buddhism, by placing duct tape on his nozzle. This is clearly unnatural and it causes psychological along with physical harm on the animal. So if I were a bodhisattva, I would definitely talk to this woman about the golden rule, which is treat others as you would want to be treated. And this definitely has roots in Buddhist doctrines because the belief of karma and the belief of dharma is very prevalent in Buddhism. And I would also remind that every being has some kind of feeling, and they just can't convey those feelings to us humans. That we should treat them like they are humans. In Buddhism, there is a conscious, there are these souls that transfer from being to being through birth and rebirth. So it is necessary to treat each animal as if they were a human. The last thing that we're going to look at is religious experience. And religious experience is completely different from each person. Each person meditates, worships, and prays differently, and that yields different results for each person. As you can see here, these are a bunch of monks that are sitting and meditating together. That is a group experience, but meditation can also occur individually or in a small group of people. So the experience that those people will receive it's very different between each scenario. Another problem with religious experience is that it's completely subjective, so it's not possible to accurately quantify people's experience because of the fact that the account that people are receiving is subjective, therefore it's not as reliable as getting an objective approach. So meditation is a great way for Buddhists to understand the various doctrines, beliefs, sacred texts, and rituals that are thrown at them. Typically with religion, there's a problem with the fact that most people understand the various sayings and texts that they receive, but they have a hard time processing it and applying it to their life. So meditation is a good way for them to take beliefs and apply them to their own lives. In the case of Buddhism, Buddhists frequently go to meditation retreats and they decide to ponder on a koan, or a puzzling story. This koan is specific to Zen Buddhism. In Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism, there are different ways to meditate, but in Zen Buddhism, which is directly related to Mahayana Buddhism, it's a branch of Mahayana Buddhism, they ponder on koans. And so they meditate on that story or that phrase for long periods of time in hopes of finding a viable answer. Then they report to their supervisor, who is most likely a bodhisattva, in hope of finding a viable answer. So this is pretty useful because in the 1950s, two women found meditation through these retreats under the supervision of Nagasawa Sozen Roshi, who was a strict teacher who first created an all-women meditation retreat. Back then, usually women had to go to these retreats under the supervision of men, but this woman, she decided to take all women there, and she helped several of these women achieve enlightenment or to achieve a grasp as to what Buddhism really is. One woman, she was very upset because she had lost her son in the war, but going to this retreat, she understood what Buddhism was all about, and she achieved peace and she became content with her life even after losing her son. And the second woman who was helped by the Miss Nagasawa Sozen Roshi was a woman who had trouble understanding and applying Buddhist doctrines and beliefs into her life because she was just thrust into becoming a Buddhist leader. So the Nagasawa Sozen Roshi woman, she helped that girl to understand certain aspects of Buddhism. Thus, meditation can help people that are lost or that need to find a possible route to enlightenment in Buddhism. So thank you for listening to my Buddhism photo essay. I hope you enjoyed. Yay!